We'll be live in just a moment. And we're live.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Nice to see you all here. Even though I cannot see you per se, I can perceive that you're here. And I've been talking to a few people in the chat room. Nice for you to show up for our 50th annual BOC. I know that technology is hard. Some people have been having some difficulties or difficult issues. Please don't get upset. Type up your complaint or technical issue in the chat box, and our staff members will get back to you within a few minutes or sometimes even seconds, and will help you get it all back to normal. So my name is Dr. Vlad Wyman, and I am indeed Vice Chair of this wonderful organization, VICIDA. And today, I would like to introduce to you our keynote speaker. And 1 second. I apologize for this little delay. I'm also having some technical difficulties. Now, I would like to tell you that following this session, there will be a short 10-minute break so that you could stretch your legs and grab an extra cup of coffee or something like that. Welcome once again to our third session of this Virtual Business Outlook Conference. As I said, up next this morning is our keynote speaker, Dr. John Boudreau. Dr. Boudreau is Professor Emeritus of Management and Organization and a Senior Research Scientist with the Center for Effective Organizations at the Marshall School of Business, University of Southern California. Dr. Boudreau is recognized worldwide for breakthrough research on the bridge between superior human capital, talent, and sustainable competitive advantage. His research has received several awards, including the Academy of Management's Organizational Behavior New Concept and Human Resource Scholarly Contribution Awards. Dr. Boudreau is a fellow of the National Academy of Human Resources, the American Psychological Association, and the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. He received the Henneman Award for Lifetime Achievement from the HR Division of the Academy of Management. I cannot really tell you how excited I am to have Dr. Boudreau join us today, so please help me in welcoming Dr. Boudreau this morning.
Thank you, Vlad. As always, it is a pleasure to see you. I think all of us are thinking it would be wonderful to be together in person, and hopefully we can all look forward to that happening pretty soon. I'm broadcasting to you today from northern New Mexico. As Vlad said, I'm still affiliated with the Marshall School of Business right up the road at the University of Southern California, and I'm currently kind of Professor Emeritus and working here. So again, it's a pleasure to be with you for this VICIDA conference, 50th anniversary. I was fascinated by the earlier morning discussion. I managed to hear a little bit of it as we were prepping for my session, and in particular, some of the really innovative work that's going on to create an ecosystem of work, the partnership between the, and I'm sure I won't get the names right, between the veterinary college and the pet hospital. I'll touch on that a little bit here. But anyway, congratulations to all of you who were recognized today. Thanks to all of you for joining me in this virtual mode. When Vlad and I talked about what I might talk about today, turns out that I'm right in the middle of revising a manuscript for a book that will be published by MIT Press in 2022. And so it's on my mind, this idea of the future of work. And I've been writing a bit about some of the intended and unintended consequences that we might see out of the decisions that are being made during this COVID era, and also due to some of the other disruptions that we've been seeing. So today I'm going to share some of that work with you. A few of these ideas have appeared before in my other books, particularly books with my colleague Robin J. Suthasan, who was a consultant at Willis Towers Watson until this week and has now moved to Mercer. So all due credit to him, and of course to Vlad and others that have influenced these ideas. There's also an article that just appeared online in the Sloan Management Review out of MIT, And that article is called Work Without Jobs. And it also is kind of a brief description of some of the ideas that I'll talk about today. You can see on the screen the way that you can reach me, lots of portals there, or if you're in the mood to tweet or something like that, that's how you do it there. So what I'm planning to do then is share some of the ideas that I've been working on with examples from organizations, most of them fairly large organizations, because those are the ones that get the press. But I also hope that you can find some applicability to your organization, whether it be a large one or a smaller one. And I'll return to that at the end. Vlad was kind enough to ask me if I might put in a slide where I just put a bookmark in to offer you some thoughts about different kinds of organizations. So let's get started. This is one of my favorite graphical diagrams, particularly the one on the upper left. And so the upper one on the left, the reason I like it is that it shows an iPhone. I believe it's about the iPhone 7, so already very dated. But this was a pivotal moment for me. That's not me in the picture. But that was the phone in which they combined the power plug with the headphone plug. Now, many of you, just like I am now, are used to using wireless headphones because of that. But for me, I spent a lot of time doing what I'm doing today, and it was wonderful to have both my headphones securely plugged in and the power plugged in. Now, the iPhone had been being upgraded for decades and decades, and I hardly noticed it. And then there came a day where the upgrade of the iPhone affected my work absolutely fundamentally, and I had to learn lots of new ways of doing things. I like that metaphor because I think it's a good metaphor for the future of work. Work is, in an accelerated way, always being upgraded. Every day, automation can do a little bit more of work. Every day, a freelancer or a contractor or volunteers can do a little bit more of the work. And so as we think about our comfortable work being bundled into a job and being done by an employee, and I think to this morning's discussion, when we go out and look for people, we look for people who hold certain degrees and we see if they fit a job. What I'm going to suggest to you, and what the new book is about, is that constant upgrading process requires that we think very differently than our traditional way of thinking about work as a job, a worker as a job holder, and qualifications reside in degrees, just to overcharacterize a little bit. The lower right diagram then is the melting ice cubes, and I've been writing quite a bit about that in my blogs on LinkedIn and through the Center for Effective Organizations. And another metaphor that I like about the future of work is that work is melting. Think of the ice cubes as the job as a holder of work. And what we're seeing, and I'll give you some illustrations here in just a moment, is the melting of jobs, and the pieces of the jobs are becoming more fluid. Tasks, projects, etc. In addition, there's a melting of workers. Now, I must say my editor at the MIT Press said, I don't like that you say melted workers, John. It sounds like the Wizard of Oz, you know, where the water is poured onto the Wicked Witch of the West and she's melting. But I'm going to use it anyway because I like it. Workers are also melting, and I think you see a beautiful example in the discussion of the veterinary hospital and the veterinary degree this morning, where a student can now get what we might call stackable qualifications. Each class comes with a certificate, so to speak, and then the classes do build up to a degree. But as the student takes the classes, they're recognizable to the workplace in terms of those deconstructed or melted qualifications. And you don't have to wait for a degree before you can recognize that worker and their capabilities. And the same thing is happening inside companies as workers are sort of seen more as the whole person and seen more in terms of their capabilities than just the job they hold. Okay, so let's begin. I'm not going to read every one of these to you, so you can relax about that, but I have them in the slides so that you can go back and refer to them. There are links here. Many of these have been featured in blogs that I've written as well at the Center for Effective Organizations. For those of you that are sponsors, thank you. And for those of you that are not, I encourage you to go look at organizations at USC or CEO at USC. So as you can see here, one of the things that has happened during the COVID pandemic is that organizations have been pivoting very quickly to new kinds of work. We have an outdoor gear maker in the first example that learned how to make face shields. That meant changing their workflows. That meant changing their materials and training. And like so many of these examples, they're going to say, we did what we thought might have taken years in just weeks or months. Same thing with the second example. Here you have a furniture maker. And in less than a month, they're suddenly making gowns and face shields. And they did that because the work of gowns and face shields was available and would allow them to retain their employees, but the employees had to pivot their capabilities. Again, pivots that people would have thought would take months or years are now taking weeks. General Motors and Hitachi, again, the example there is a bit detailed, but basically they got together, these two companies, and transformed a GM clean room into a mask factory in six days. Employees volunteered to learn new skills from making automobiles to making masks. GM filled 13 shifts in less than 2 hours. Again, the idea is if you had asked GM with one email, do you think you can change the skills of 315 people to fill 13 shifts in a matter of days? I think they would have said, you've got to be crazy. These people hold jobs. We have to wait and rewrite the job descriptions. We have to put in classes. We don't know what their capabilities are. We'd have to put in a competency system, all of which turns out was not necessary if you allowed the jobs to melt and change into jobs that are needed to make masks and gowns. And if you allowed the workers to melt out of their categorization as a job holder and instead see them for all the capabilities they have and the ones that they could develop. Sorry. Another thing you're hearing a great deal about these days, and there are many, many platforms and companies that are doing it, is something that we might call inside gigs. Now, most of you think of the gig economy probably as Uber or Lyft or DoorDash or many of the other services that we might be using today even more. But I'm going to think of gigs more as any talent marketplace where if you have a capability, you can go on a platform and you can let the world know you have that capability, and people who need it can find you. And they can offer you projects and you can do them and get paid for them and get rated on them, etc. More like some of you may know a company called Upwork, which is a freelance platform, one of the largest in the world, where you can put virtually any project that you have, building a web page, writing a report, doing research, etc. on Upwork, and Upwork will find a team of freelancers to help you do it. Now, what's happening, the reason I say inside gigs, that's the title of a book by a couple of my colleagues, not my book, but Kelly Stephen Ways and Edie Goldberg. Companies are creating these gigs inside. So instead of going outside to hire a freelancer, what companies are doing is they're creating a platform inside. Let's say it's only available to their employees. So everyone already has an employment contract. Everyone already holds a job. But what these companies do is they say, look, if you have additional capabilities beyond your job, here's a platform where you can tell us about them. And if you're a leader and you have work to be done, you don't have to wait to write a job description or a requisition. You can put that work out there as a project. And the inside gig will match the people who have that capability to the project that the leader put on the platform. Very often those projects would have had to become jobs and have to fill up, let's say, 40 hours per week. Now the project can be very short term, the work can get done, and the leader is freed and has an alternative to thinking only of a job as the way that we do the work. And you can see two very prominent current examples that you read a great deal about is the Unilever Flex Experience example and the Cisco example. Several years ago, when I was doing this work, probably about 5 or 7 years ago, when I first started writing about this, I discovered that Disney had this kind of a platform. And one of my favorite examples is that Disney put a project on the platform of doing the voiceover for the trailer to a new Disney movie. And it turns out that one of their accountants said, I think I have the skills to do a voiceover. And it turned out that accountant was the best qualified, best voice for the trailer. So the accountant still has a job of being an accountant at Disney, but the accountant now also has a project of doing a voiceover for the trailer for the movie. Imagine the engagement that accountant has with the mission and with the products and with Disney's media by being able to do a voiceover. I love that one because you just wouldn't think of an accountant as a voiceover expert. And so to me, it really illustrates the power of looking at what Disney called the whole person. We're not just going to see you in terms of your ability to do accounting just because that's your job. We want you to tell us about the whole array of your capabilities. And I'm hoping you're beginning to see that as we let the jobs meld into their parts, call them tasks or projects, and we let the workers melt into their parts, call them skills or capabilities, you can imagine a world in which those parts begin to live on their own. And instead of being bundled into jobs or waiting to be called a degree, you can begin to match the parts to each other. And I'm hoping you can see how that fundamentally changes the way we think about work and how it fundamentally opens up options. And I think in COVID, my point is we're already seeing the melting happen. The melting is happening at an accelerated pace. You might call COVID the blowtorch, for example, that is melting those ice cubes. And I don't think we're going to go back. So I'd invite you to begin to think about how this might apply in your organization. One of the big drivers of this melting, and something that I wrote about with my colleague Robin J. Suthasan in a book called Reinventing Jobs, is work automation. And I've given you a few examples here that are prominent in the press where robots or other types of automation are actually doing the work that humans did. When we think about COVID, it's work such as checking on a patient. Robot rolls in, asks the patient how they're doing. The patient says, I'm doing fine. That gets recorded and the robot moves on. The robot walks in, sometimes takes a temperature. You can see some of the, sometimes the robot is disinfecting. Now, I think these are very good, vivid examples of some of the questions of work automation that I have and others have been writing about. You could say, well, these robots are taking away the work of employees. But in my work with healthcare organizations, what I'm hearing is, no, these robots are allowing our nurses, for an extraordinarily short supply, our nurses are able to work, as they call it, at the top of their license. A nurse is not needed to take a temperature. A nurse is not needed to ask a patient if they're doing okay. That if robots can do that, then we can allow the nurses to be doing the more important work that these tasks would take away from them if we had to bundle them into the nursing job and we had no other way to do it. You also see this in terms of the inside gig idea. For example, lots of healthcare organizations are asking their administrators to keep their certifications up to date, so that an administrator can do in one healthcare organization 8 hours a week of work doing injections or some other on the floor emergency work. Again, that way we can take the nurses and give them the priority work that we need them to do. And now our administrators have melted their job. Yes, I am an administrator, that is my job. And I have the capability to give injections or some other help on the floor, and I now add that to my work. So I think I'm very optimistic about this, but that said, it means a very deep rethinking of how we think about work. On this slide, and I apologize that it's not superb resolution, I just copied this image from the World Economic Forum, but you have the link down at the bottom. You can see each column is essentially the kind of work that is being moved toward robots. So for example, in the clinical care, which I just talked about, that's the blue one, second from the left. 7 countries are doing clinical care, and you can see the most use is disinfecting. The next one is healthcare worker telepresence, prescription meal dispensing, etc. So each column gives you some ideas about a different kind of work that is being automated to a different degree, most at the top, least at the bottom, and the number of countries that are doing it. And again, I refer you to the excellent World Economic Forum report, which my colleague Robin contributed to. Now, along the way today, we're not going to have time to do this, but I'm going to give you examples of what I might call breakout questions that I would do if I were teaching my students or if we were doing an executive program. And so I've given you an idea about work becoming more fluid and deconstructed. And again, I'm not going to ask for an answer, but I would say perhaps this is fodder for your discussion in the chat box or perhaps of the panel later on. Inside your organization, where and how has your work, not your job necessarily, but the work of your people, become more fluid? Perhaps even your work has become more fluid, or what we might call deconstructed, so that the tasks are living on their own, or you're fluidly adding things to your normal job description. It could be jobs being deconstructed and reinvented. It could be inside gigs for employees, or it could be work automation. So now moving on to the next topic. I talked about the idea of inside gigs, But one of the things we're seeing accelerated with the COVID pandemic, and that I think will continue, is the idea of engaging workers who are not your employees. Now, you all probably are familiar with contractors who might work in your organization. Some of you may work as a contractor. You might be familiar with freelancers. In a book called Lead the Work, which we wrote about 7 years ago, Robin and me and David Creelman, we suggested the idea that leaders are going to have to think about the work, not just the employees, because the workers in your organization will not just be your employees, but also contractors, volunteers, freelancers, and others. Here I've given you several examples of the kinds of things that COVID has accelerated. So in Renfro Corporation, they pivoted to making face masks, and they had to find 550 temporary workers to assemble the masks in the locations. I like this example because he reached out to a population that is not usually considered as job holders in their organization. These are young people, aged 16 to 20, who aren't even in the labor market yet, and he realized they had the capabilities to do this, or they could develop those capabilities quickly on the job. And so he created, in a way, a market for this talent pool that hadn't been tapped before. I know many of you in Ventura County are working on pathways from education to work, pathways for overlooked populations. That's a very, very big thing here in northern New Mexico, particularly with the indigenous populations and others. This is an example of that. Thinking creatively and saying, I may not have a job, but I do have this temporary work, and can I engage this population? Sometimes organizations trade employees. The Kroger supermarket company borrowed the employees that the Cisco company had furloughed, because Kroger needed lots of people in its distribution centers and stores, and Cisco had some that were available. At the bottom, you have a university-motivated example of putting two organizations together so that they could share and borrow the people each of them employed. Very often, the people who are borrowed stay employed in their first organization, but they have permission to go work at the other organization while the first organization pays them. Many of the public policy and social safety net initiatives that have come out of COVID, such as expanded unemployment benefits, et cetera, those things are examples of the kind of safety net that allows this sort of work, where workers do not need to have a job to get their benefits. They don't need to have a job to continue to be paid, and it opens up this kind of flexibility. So again, something for you to think about tapping workers from new sources. This is a rather complex diagram, and I refer you to my good colleagues at I4CP. This is taken from a report that they did that I helped advise on about the talent work ecosystem. And basically, this is how it works. The I4CP diagram is to the right, and you can see that it's alternative ways to think about workers other than just employment. So at the top, internal talent marketplaces. At the next fin to the right, external talent exchanges. You can see gig workers and freelancers down there at the lower right, crowdsourcing near the bottom, partnerships with other organizations, et cetera. And then what I've done is I've added a box to the left that says regular full-time jobs. And my invitation to you is to imagine how much your organization actually thinks this way about a deconstructed and boundaryless talent ecosystem, where the tasks can flow to the kinds of workers you see on the right and don't have to be contained in the jobs that you see on the left. Now, that's not to say that jobs are going away. What it is to say is that leaders should not only have the option of a regular full-time job when we say we have work to be done. They should also be aware of the many other options that exist in the diagram to the right. And as I said, this is not without controversy, and it's not without its problems. There are very major local, regional, and global social policies that need to be thought about in order to make this kind of an ecosystem possible. But my position is that this ecosystem is going to grow, that the genie, so to speak, is out of the bottle, and that in your thinking about the future of work, it's going to be important to ask yourself, does our system only show the left-hand box? And how quickly could we begin to think creatively to incorporate some of the things in the right-hand box? And then what kinds of things will you need from governments, local education institutions, the workers themselves in order to make that happen? So again, if we were doing a breakout, I would ask you to step back and ask, how does this apply to us? Where and how is your organization's work boundary becoming, we might say, more fluid or more permeable so that people can move across your boundary? And this thing called an employment contract isn't the only way that someone can enter your boundary and work for you. And I've given you some examples: contractors, freelancers, volunteers. Tours of duty means someone works for you for a little while and then goes and works for someone else and then comes back. And you keep track of them and you stay in touch with them as they leave you and move to another employer and then come back. And then borrowing from partners. It's very much often in your region. Some of you have surpluses of workers. Others of you have shortages. Have you thought about creative ways to create a partnership where you share those employees? Just as examples for you to think about or chat about in the chat box. Perhaps give an example if you're already doing some of this. And then as I've mentioned many times, there is a need for policies here. I'm going to now focus in. I mentioned that I'll return to policies that make this what we might call platform work as a freelancer, work as a contractor, etc. There's a good deal of discussion about how to make platform work more better. Here, what I want to talk about are the policies that you may be forming as you move from the remote work world, or even from the on-site work that has been changed, to the next type of work. Some people are calling it Build Back Better. That's Joe Biden's phrase for it, back to better. And what I've been writing about is the idea that the COVID pandemic and other disruptions are creating decisions now about how work is done that will stay with your organization and with society after the pandemic or the other disruptions have passed. And I thought I'd share, Vlad asked me to share some of the thinking I'm doing about how those policies are being formed. So you're all probably well aware of the headlines. That's what this screen is about. Twitter and Square announced in May 2020 that their employees could work from home forever. So maybe that's the right policy that you should adopt. Anyone who can work from home forever. What would be the implications of that? What expectations does that set up with your workers? Jamie Dimon, on the other hand, of JP Morgan Chase, announced that he expects people to return to the office. And he sees significant lasting damage if workers don't return. He further said something like, I love the collaboration and the invention that happens in the hallways or at the water cooler or in the, when they're having a meal together. And I want everybody on site so that you have all those lovely, unpredictable encounters with your workers. And that's how we get innovation to happen. Pretty different idea than work from home forever. I don't think Twitter and Square are willing to give up innovation, but they seem somehow to feel that innovation can happen from home. Google extended their work from home policy by a year. They're being more cautious and plan to accommodate remote work indefinitely where they can. Microsoft said work from home less than 50% of the time without approval. So basically, you work it out. But once you get to 50% of the time, we want you to get approval from someone, someone who's using some kind of policy or decision rule. And then a June 2020 article summarized the research. I've got the link there to the New York Times article. It summarized the research, when there is decades of that research, that suggests that remote work may make collaboration more difficult than a policy like work from home forever might reflect. So I just wanted to raise this because I think the future of work is also going to be defined by the logic and the sophistication and the evidence on which such policies are based. And I must say, when you have policies that range from work from home forever to, well, work from home, but if it hits 50%, then get approval from someone, to Jamie Dimon saying, I want everybody back here. I think that what we have is evidence that our CEOs really don't know what is the evidence and what should be the policy, and are instead kind of leaving it up to their organizations to figure it out. My own view is that that's a somewhat risky situation, and without proper policies, organizations may miss really good opportunities. So where might you get those policies? Well, what I'm seeing is some organizations look to fads, like the ones I just talked about. And I don't really mean fads to be too pejorative, but basically it's what is the press covering? What are the most notable CEOs doing? Gosh, if Jamie Dimon does it, then that tells me maybe we should do it. Or fashions. What I mean by that is popularity, not just notable, but you see a lot of surveys now saying, we're going to report to you what companies seem to be doing. Here's how many companies said 50%. Here's how many companies said 2 or 3 days a week. Here's how many companies said everybody return to work. That kind of thing. Or favorability. So you find out what are the most popular among your leaders, managers, or employees. So you do a survey and you say, what would you like? And you get responses from all of your people. Another way is fairness or consistency. Some organizations are saying, I want a policy I can apply to everyone. So some of them are saying, everyone must be in at least 2 days a week. And then we'll think about flexibility. And then finally, function or compliance. Some people start with, what are the policies that are required? If IT says this sort of work has to be done in a secure environment, and that environment exists here in a building that we own. If legal says this kind of work has legal risks, perhaps risks of security or risks of revealing things, you must bring that on site. So again, what I see here is we're at a very unfrozen moment in terms of policies as well. And I would encourage you to begin to think about what are the policies that you're enacting and what should be the logic. Should we have a logic about where and how collaboration happens? What is the evidence about that? Does collaboration only happen in person? The answer is no. Is virtual harder? The answer is generally yes, but then I would propose to you that a lot of this research was done pre-COVID, and that your workers, particularly those workers working from home, are learning new ways to collaborate that the researchers have never seen before. And so maybe it's time for you to do research in your organization, and again, to think really deeply about what are we trying to accomplish with our return to work policies? Is it better collaboration? Is it fairness? Is it something we can say applies to everyone so that our managers and leaders don't have to make any decisions? Or do we want to give tools to our frontline managers and our workers to figure it out themselves? And so here's the breakout question that I might propose as you think about these return to work policies. Where are you getting them? What is their source? What is their logic? And how clear and transparent are you about the logical outcomes that you're trying to achieve? And then how much flexibility or discretion do they allow? I think it's going to be important for organizations to think about if we say, well, up to 50%, as Microsoft did, and then quote unquote, get approval. Well, who's going to offer that approval? And what are the tools they have for knowing how to answer tough questions? Like, I want to come in because my home office is terrible, but the rest of my team wants to work from home. Or the team says, we all want to meet on site. And someone says, I'm sure I can do it from home by Zooming in. How much personalization do you make in the accommodations that you do? So if someone has a very good home office, do we allow them to work from home, but we require others to come in because they have a difficult situation at home? So I think, again, you are going to be much better at me at answering these questions, but I think it's worth stepping back and considering, are we just lurching towards something that's popular? Or have we really thought about the logic of how our people will work with these policies, how approvals will be granted, and what we're really trying to achieve? What's interesting to me is we think about this as affecting the work from home population, the people whose work allowed them to move away from the site. But I think what you're also seeing, as we saw earlier, is this work is melting among those people that need to be on site as well. And so I think one of the hidden elements here for the future is that on-site workers are also reinventing the way they work. And they also are going to be reluctant to just go back to the old definition of their jobs on site. Think about the nurse example. Think about the pivoting that all those workers on the manufacturing floor have done. So I think there's deep thinking to be done by leaders in organizations, and to a certain extent, policymakers, communities, et cetera, about what do we really mean by quote unquote return to work or work after COVID. And is it time for organizations to begin to think carefully about that and be more transparent with their workers and managers to give them the tools they need to make great decisions? And that brings us to this concept of leadership. one of the reactions to the reviewers, a lot of them heads of HR or other executives and managers, when they read the first version of our new book, which basically the book says work is going to be deconstructed, workers are going to be deconstructed, and you're not so often going to have a job or a job structure. You're going to be coordinating parts of workers across multiple projects, and you're going to be coordinating with other leaders who also want part of those workers to work on projects. And one of the things our reviewers raised pretty heavily is that's going to change fundamentally. We might say leadership, but also we might include management there. Now, here, this is pretty speculative, I have to admit to you. I'm just beginning to think about this as we write the revision of the book. But I thought I'd share with you a couple of ideas here. So what will it mean to lead in a situation where work and workers are deconstructed, where you don't have a hierarchy that says these are the however many, 4, 10, 100 people that work for me. I'm in a box, that box has lines, those lines go to these other jobs, and there are 100 people in those jobs, and they work for me. And if I need to get something done, I know that they report to me. Well, what if we took those boxes away? And what if now we expanded our view and said it's you as a leader, but it's also these 5 other leaders, and you have a bunch of workers working for all 5 of you, and you're going to be trading them off, and they're going to be moving to projects based on an internal marketplace, etc. But like I said, I don't have the answer, and I probably won't even when we write the book. But the structure I'm thinking of is to look to some of the really good work about what leadership means. For example, we might start with these characteristics. And we might say, to what extent do these characteristics change in a world where you're going from having people in jobs with lines on the organization chart that report to you, to people who are more fluid? The idea of influence changes greatly, because now you're influencing a much wider group of workers, but you're also influencing them through the mechanism of these projects. The idea of communication, the idea of the ability to delegate, etc. All of those, it seems to me, change pretty fundamentally and will require that you begin to prepare your leaders to work more as a team, more as a group of hubs of talent, rather than someone that can say, you work for me, or this is my span of control. So kind of final breakout question, and then I'll turn to some ideas that Vlad asked me to think about. So on this one, how has or should your leadership change to encompass this idea of fluid or deconstructed work, fluid and deconstructed boundaries, and fluid and deconstructed workers? And I'll just offer this framework. We hear a lot about models that go to leadership traits: learning agility, self-awareness, self-confidence, courage, etc. I suspect you'll recognize this in your own system of leadership. Other systems of leadership emphasize behaviors: showing empathy, showing vulnerability, communicating well, learning. Others emphasize the work outcomes or maybe the reactions that we want to have among followers. So we want followers to experience trust. We want them to experience engagement or openness or resilience. And then finally, all of this should lead to strategic goals like innovation, constructive conflict, speed, agility, diversity, etc. So maybe a way to think about this is to say, in this new world of, the title of the book is, and the article is, Work Without Jobs, how might these traits, behaviors, outcomes, and strategic goals be redefined? Now, like I said, this new world of work I'm talking about is not going to affect all work immediately by any imaginable trend. But I think you're going to have lots of work that's embedded in jobs for quite a long time. What I'm suggesting is that it is important for you to recognize, though, where your work is beginning to melt, and to be ahead of the curve by beginning to see that melted work through a new framework, rather than have the melting surprise you and leave you with no framework to work with. I'm hoping some of these remarks will give you some ideas about asking, it's not every job in our organization, but where are those places where we are seeing more fluidity in our work, in our workers, and in our boundaries? Or where should we, to solve some of the issues that we're seeing? And then finally, and this is a busy slide because I just kind of wrote down the ideas I had, Vlad was kind enough to say, John, maybe spend a little bit of time not only reviewing what you said about large enterprises, but maybe giving us some idea about how you think about this, the implications for other kinds of organizations. So at the top, we've talked about large organizations. You have an opportunity, if you're big, to lead by innovating at scale, to show others what this looks like, maybe with internal gigs, etc. You have a chance to use your voice and your influence, because you're a big player, to encourage the social and economic policies that'll help with fluid work, portable benefits, portable pensions, translatable skills, and credentials, just like we heard in the veterinary example. You can incorporate fluid work into your strategic planning. You can encourage your vendors to support your efforts to have fluid work as an example. You can invest in either experiments within your own company or experiments in the local region or even on the national level to try to create fluid work, maybe experiments with platforms or experiments with credentialing, etc. And you can model, when you automate, you can model how to automate so that automation is a combination of humans and automation, which is almost always the right answer, and not just assume that automation will replace people or simply go after the labor cost savings. If you're a small business or a startup, I think there you can band together with other businesses. You really have an opportunity to create a talent ecosystem where you're borrowing talent from each other, where you're trading talent back and forth. Maybe institutionalize using platform-based work as one of your standard options, using Upwork, contractors, etc. Many startups brag that they have 2 employees that are full-time regular employees, the CEO perhaps and the CFO, and everything else they do on a platform. Join with local education and governments to build ecosystems. Again, I think we saw a great example this morning. And again, as you do automation, think about it as combining with humans, not necessarily just replacing them. It's not that automation won't sometimes replace certain tasks that a person does, but the answer that we found in our book, Reinventing Jobs, when we looked at the research and the practice, was that in almost all occasions, automation only replaces part of the job. It's like that iPhone example, where the work is evolving and it's being upgraded more than replacing the human. If you're an NGO, then I think we think about drawing your talent from platforms and again, modeling fluid work, encouraging the policies like microfinancing, portable benefits, etc., that allow platforms to provide good work rather than just thinking about creating good jobs, and expanding that idea of good work and worker voice to the platforms. Local and state governments, I think we're beginning to see it, create local and state government platforms, use the fact that you span so many organizations to encourage organizations to come together and think creatively about how more fluid work might help solve regional and local problems. Again, I wince, I must tell you, I wince very strongly when I hear very smart, very dedicated government representatives say the word good jobs or say the word employees. And not so much that they're not thinking in the right way, but I think as soon as you say good jobs as a policy goal, you have limited yourself to the options you have to actually make work better for a large number of workers. And then, of course, subject matter experts like Vlad and perhaps me and perhaps many others of you to begin to use your voice to encourage thinking about work, not just as jobs, to get out of the mindset that work equals jobs always, to expand your concepts such as work, voice, careers, and learning to encompass the idea that those don't necessarily have to happen in a job or in an employer, but they can happen in different ways. And then finally, and I'm not going to read this one, we're at the conclusion now, I have left you with a slide that is a charter that was put together by the World Economic Forum about principles for good, what we might call platform work. A platform would be that software that helps Uber drivers find rides, but it could also be the platform that sits under Upwork as it finds freelancers those projects, or the platform that sits inside an inside gig. It's not always software, it's usually software augmented. It can also be the humans that make it run. Anyway, you can see the list here. How do we improve diversity and inclusion, safety and well-being, flexibility and fair conditions on the platforms so that we don't rely just on employment as our vehicle for creating these things. And so I'm hoping that will leave you with some thought-provoking ideas about the role that you might have in the future of work, about how this future of work without jobs that I've described may be affecting your organization, or how it will if you think out into the future. And hopefully some fodder for the mill as you chat in your chat box, as you work. I'm sure you'll come up with much better ideas than mine, and I'll learn a lot from seeing the chat and perhaps hearing the panel react to some of this. And again, let me give my terrific thanks to everybody at Visita, to Vlad for inviting me, and to the team that's been helping with this platform that's allowed me to be with you today. So with that, I'll conclude. I'll thank you very much, and I will go away from the image that you're seeing, and I believe now it's time for you to take a break and look forward to coming back to the next session. Thank you.